I pushed the bad memory away, got up from the sofa, where I'd practically worn a groove into the cushions over the last 3 months, and walked toward the bathroom. My son had called. My son wanted me there. Maybe, just maybe, our family could heal after all. Perhaps I had been too rigid, too much the auditor and not enough of a father. By 6 o'clock, I was dressed in a clean, sky blue button-down shirt that Karen had bought me years ago. Keys in hand, wallet in my back pocket. The garage air was heavy with the smell of old motor oil and concrete dust. I climbed into my reliable 2019 Hyundai Sonata, a practical car, the exact kind a retired auditor drives. I turned the ignition key. The starter motor cranked. It sounded strong and completely normal, turning over just like always. But the engine simply wouldn't catch. I tried again, pressing the gas pedal. Same thing. The dashboard lights came on perfectly fine. The battery was clearly okay. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 full. I popped the hood and stared at the engine, hoping it would somehow magically explain itself to me. Nothing looked obviously wrong, but then again, I was never skilled with mechanical things. Numbers, budgets, spreadsheets, those I understood. Engines were like a foreign language. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Greg. "Dad, we're waiting. Don't be late." Frustration, sharp and clawing, crept up my spine. I didn't want to let him down. Not now. Not when we were finally reconnecting after 3 long months of silence that felt like 3 years. I called a tow service, gave them the address, and began pacing my cracked asphalt driveway, spiderwebs of damage spreading everywhere. Another thing I'd meant to fix since Karen died but never got around to. Everything around me seemed to be quietly falling apart. Another text buzzed. "Everything's ready." I typed out a careful explanation about the car trouble, but then deleted it because it sounded too much like an excuse. I typed it again. My hands were shaking a little, a tremor I'd noticed more recently. Age, I figured, or maybe just stress. When the tow truck finally showed up 40 minutes later, I got into the cab and gave the driver directions to Ken's auto repair. It was the only place I knew that might still be open this late in the evening. Happens sometimes with these newer cars. The driver, a round-faced, friendly man, said, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. All those computers and sensors and emissions equipment. One tiny thing goes wrong, and the entire system just shuts down. Ken's good, though. He'll figure it out quickly. I hope so, I said, looking out the window as my old neighborhood passed by. I saw the houses where I'd watched families grow up, the street where I taught Greg to ride his bicycle. I really need to get somewhere tonight. It's important. The whole time, riding in that truck with my Sonata dragging behind us like a dead body, one thought kept looping in my head. 3 months of silence, broken by a dinner invitation. I knew I should be more skeptical, but I just couldn't be. I was too tired of the isolation in that big house, where every single room reminded me of Karen. I was tired of wondering if I had been too hard on him, if I should have just handed over the money and stopped asking questions. He was my son, after all, my only child, the only family I had left in the entire world. If he was reaching out, I felt I absolutely had to reach back. I had to believe there was still something left between us worth saving. The tow truck pulled into Ken's auto repair at 7:30 p.m. on the dot. Harsh, industrial lights blazed inside the service bay. A mechanic in oil-stained overalls, wiping his hands on a greasy red rag, watched us pull in. The driver lowered my Hyundai from the flatbed with a loud, mechanical groan and the sound of metal scraping metal. I climbed out of the truck cab, my knees complaining from the sudden movement, and walked up to the mechanic. "Ken?" I called about my car. "It's urgent. I really need to get somewhere tonight. My son is expecting me." Ken nodded slowly, studying my car. "Let me get it up on the lift. Take a proper look," he said. He pointed to a scuffed metal door. "There's coffee in the waiting room if you want it. Might be old, but it's hot. Won't take long." The waiting room smelled like burned coffee and old rubber. Cracked plastic chairs lined one wall. Through a scratched window, I could see Ken positioning my car onto the hydraulic lift. I sat down and pulled out my phone. It was 7:53 p.m. A text from Greg. "Dad? Where are you?" 5 minutes later, The stew is getting cold. Everyone's waiting for you. Each message felt more demanding, more insistent. I typed apologies, tried to explain my predicament. My fingers felt sluggish on the screen. 25 minutes slowly crawled by. I watched Ken working methodically and focused beneath the raised car. Then he suddenly straightened up fast. Even through the dirty window, I could tell something was terribly wrong. The color had completely drained from his face. He stood there, staring intently at something underneath my car, then walked toward the waiting room. When he pushed the door open, his hands were visibly trembling. "Mr. Stone," he said, his voice strained. "You need to come and see this. Right now." I followed him back into the brightly lit shop. The harsh overhead lights made everything look exposed. Ken pointed his flashlight beam at the brake lines. Even I could see it instantly. Clean, deliberate cut. Not wear or damage, but a slice. Someone had intentionally cut right through the line. "Someone did this," Ken said, his voice dropping low. "This was absolutely not an accident. Someone wanted you to crash. To die." He moved the flashlight beam over to the main engine sensor. "They sabotaged this too. The engine would have eventually started, gotten you a few miles down the road. Then it would have failed completely on the highway when you were doing 60, maybe 70 miles an hour. And when you hit the brakes." He didn't need to finish his sentence. My phone vibrated. I pulled it out with numb fingers. "Greg, Dad, hurry." The word hurry stared back at me. Hurry to what? Hurry to die on the freeway with no brakes. A memory flashed, sharp and clear. Sunday night, 2:30 in the morning. A metallic scraping sound from the garage. I'd lain there listening, decided it was nothing. Maybe the wind, maybe the neighborhood cats. But Greg had a spare key. Greg knew I kept the car in the garage. Greg. The shop floor seemed to tilt under my feet. I steadied myself against the car's fender, breathing slowly through my nose. 30 years of auditing experience kicked in, the practice of keeping my face blank when I discovered fraud. This was just another, more personal form of theft. Someone trying to steal my life. "Ken, I need you to document everything," I said, my voice steady. "Photographs of both points of sabotage. A written report. Don't touch anything else. Leave it exactly as you found it." Ken stared at me, astonished. "Mr. Stone, we need to call the police. This is attempted murder." "Whoever did this," I quietly interrupted. "I know what it is, and I will handle it. But first, complete documentation. You know who has access to your garage." Ken's voice became cautious, suddenly suspicious. "Who would want you dead? Can you keep the car here overnight?" I asked, ignoring the question. "Don't repair a thing. Just document it and photograph it." I walked outside into the cool March air. The parking lot was empty. I began pacing, letting the cold air clear my head. Through the window, I could see Ken dutifully photographing everything and writing notes. My phone buzzed again. "Greg, Dad, hurry." I stared at the message for 5 solid minutes. $35,000. That was the amount he'd asked for 3 months ago. I had said no. Was that the moment he decided? Or was it even earlier, when Karen died, and he realized he wasn't inheriting anything yet because I was still alive? How long had my own son been planning to kill his father? I typed, "Mechanical issues. Won't make it tonight. Sorry." His response came back instantly. "When can you come?" That speed told me everything I needed to know. He was waiting. They were both waiting at that dining table, wondering why their plan had failed. I typed back, "I'll let you know." Ken emerged with a stack of printed photographs and handwritten notes. "What do you want me to do with this?" he asked. I took the documentation, folded it precisely, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The paper crinkled against my chest. "I need to rent a car," I said. "Is anywhere nearby still open?" He gave me the address for a nearby rental agency. I opened my rideshare app. It said a car was 6 minutes away. My phone buzzed one last time. "Greg, Dad." My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could see the entire picture now. The whole pattern an auditor should have noticed immediately. The dinner invitation wasn't a peace offering. It was an execution. Get me into the car. Get me on the highway. Let the sabotage do its deadly work. An accident. A tragedy. They would inherit everything. The house, the savings, the life insurance. Clean and simple. I closed the app without responding. The rideshare was 2 minutes away. I had somewhere to go now, and I had someone to see. Greg was going to wait, just like I had waited 3 months for a phone call I should never have answered. Just like he'd been waiting for me to die on the highway tonight. But I wasn't dead. And now I knew exactly who had tried to kill me. The documentation felt heavy in my pocket as headlights swept across the parking lot. My ride had arrived. I climbed into the back seat, gave the driver the rental car address, and stared out the window at the passing streetlights. My reflection stared back at me. A 63-year-old man who had just realized his own son wanted him dead. The auditor part of me was already working, meticulously cataloging the evidence and building a solid case. But underneath that professional calm, something else was growing. Something cold and patient. Something that knew how to wait, how to plan, and how to find the weak spots in someone's defense. Greg had made a terrible mistake tonight. He had failed to kill me, and now I had all the time in the world to think, to plan, and to make absolutely sure he paid for what he had tried to do. The rideshare dropped me at the rental agency 3 blocks from Ken's shop. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, while a young clerk processed my license and credit card. 20 minutes later, I was behind the wheel of a silver Toyota Camry that smelled of cheap air freshener. My phone lay on the passenger seat, screen dark. Greg's messages sat there, unanswered, burning like accusations I wasn't ready to face. I pulled onto the main road heading north. The drive was about 30 minutes through suburban sprawl and traffic lights. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my mind was running full tilt, performing calculations just as it had for 40 years in the government audit offices. Motive was clear. My estate was valued at over $600,000. The house alone was appraised at $480,000 last year. Plus the savings accounts, retirement funds, and a $100,000 life insurance policy I'd held since Greg was born. All of it would flow to him when I died. Except I wasn't supposed to die of old age. I was supposed to die tonight on the freeway when my brakes failed at 60 miles per hour. The means were equally clear. Greg had a spare key to my house. I had given it to him years ago when I still trusted him, back when he was the kind of son who would check on me if I didn't answer the phone. He knew my schedule. He knew I kept the car in the garage. He knew the latch on the side door had been broken since winter. The opportunity? This past weekend. Saturday, I was at the grocery store for 2 hours. Sunday morning, I was at the farmer's market. Either time he could have slipped in, done the cutting, and slipped back out. The metallic scraping sound at 2:30 a.m. Sunday morning. That must have been him leaving, closing the door too hard, making a noise he thought I wouldn't hear. The pieces fit together with mathematical precision. Every data point aligned. I stopped at a traffic light, staring at the red light but not really seeing the color. 3 months ago, the argument in my kitchen wasn't just about money. It was a veiled threat that I had been either too hopeful or too stupid to recognize. Greg's voice, shouting, echoed loud in my memory now. You're sitting on a huge pile of money while I'm drowning in debt. The kitchen table had jumped under his fist, and right behind him stood Martha, his wife, with her arms crossed, her face carved from ice. No effort to calm him down. No attempt at mediation. Just cold, hard calculation in those flat eyes. Then came Greg's parting words. It'll all be ours eventually anyway. Not mine, but ours. He used the present tense, not the future. He wasn't talking about an inheritance decades from now. He was talking about this week, this month. I had heard it then, but I filtered it through a father's naive assumptions. I should have been listening like an auditor. The streets of Lansdale were quiet when I arrived just after 9 o'clock. Modest 2-story homes from the 1980s lined both sides, most with their lights dimmed for the night. I quickly found Greg and Martha's house halfway down Maple Street. Every window was blazing brightly, as if they were expecting a public celebration. I parked my rented Camry around the corner where I could clearly see their living room, but where they wouldn't spot my car. I pulled out the small, worn notebook I had carried for 30 years, flipped to a clean page and noted the time. Old habits die hard. Through the large living room window, I watched Greg pacing back and forth, holding his phone tightly against his ear. Martha stood by the dining table, gesturing sharply. Even from this distance, I could easily read the pure frustration in her posture. Quick, sharp movements, pointing at Greg, pointing at the phone, shaking her head. I adjusted the rearview mirror and settled in to watch. My phone stayed quiet and secure in my pocket. 20 minutes passed. The scene inside didn't change much. Greg kept checking his phone compulsively, and Martha grew increasingly agitated. But it was what I didn't see that confirmed absolutely everything. There was no dinner on the dining table. No pot roast, no little potatoes, no reconciliation meal. Instead, papers were spread across the surface in neat stacks. Even from outside, I recognized the format. Legal-sized documents, multiple pages, the kind I had reviewed thousands of times, estate paperwork, property transfer documents. They weren't preparing dinner. They were preparing to inherit. The meal was a total fiction. The forms were ready and waiting for news of my death. I took photos through the car window with my phone, evidence, documentation. The auditor's instinct to record every detail was overwhelming. Greg checked his phone again, then showed the screen to Martha. She threw up her hands dramatically, saying something sharp. He responded defensively. They were waiting for a call, from the police, from a hospital, from someone reporting a fatal car accident. They were waiting for confirmation that their carefully laid plan had worked. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. This was my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to balance a checkbook. The man I had helped through college, through his wedding, through the tight early years when money was scarce. And he had stood in my garage 2 nights ago with a blade in his hand, methodically cutting through my brake lines while I slept upstairs. Not in a moment of rage, not in passion, but with clear premeditation and a stack of paperwork. The man I had raised didn't exist anymore. Maybe he never had, I wrote in my notebook. I jotted down the details. 8:47 p.m. Greg pacing, phone active. Martha controlling, frustrated. Papers on table. Legal documents. Estate transfer format. No dinner preparations. Expecting notification of death. Professional detachment. That professional detachment was what got me through 40 years of uncovering embezzlement, fraud, and theft. You can never let emotion cloud the evidence. The numbers tell the story. The timeline reveals the truth. I wrote my final assessment. Subject demonstrated clear motive, means, and opportunity. Evidence supports premeditated attempt on target's life. Subject poses continued threat to target's safety and assets. Recommendation. Protective action required. I started the engine of the Camry, pulled away from the curb, and didn't turn on my headlights until I had rounded the corner. Already thinking strategically, already covering my tracks. The highway back to Chestnut Hill stretched empty under the sodium lights. I drove exactly the speed limit, signaled every lane change, my hands steady despite everything that had happened. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen without picking it up. Greg. Dad, are you okay? I'm worried. Please respond. Worried? The word sat in the car like a cloud of poison gas. I took the exit toward home, toward the house with the garage where Greg had stood, armed with hatred and a cutting tool, severing more than just brake lines. The phone buzzed again. This time I didn't even look. I had work to do. Planning, preparation, strategy. My son wanted to play games with inheritance? Fine. But I had been writing the rulebook for 40 years, and I was about to teach him exactly what happens when you try to defraud a master auditor. My house was dark when I finally pulled into the driveway near 10 o'clock. I sat in the rental car for a long moment, staring at the structure I had called home for 3 decades. The garage where Greg had betrayed me, the back porch where I had pushed his tire swing, the second-floor window of his childhood bedroom. All of it felt contaminated now. I got out, locked the rental, and entered through the front door. I didn't turn on any lights, walking through the darkness to the kitchen. I sat at the table where Greg's fist had made the salt shaker dance 3 months ago. Then I began to think. Hours crawled by. I filled page after page of my notebook with analysis, columns of assets, vulnerabilities, required actions. I drew lines connecting concepts, circled keywords. This was my job, what I had done for 4 decades. Tracing the money, finding the weakness, building the case. By dawn, I had a framework. By 7 o'clock Tuesday morning, I had a comprehensive plan. I showered, put on a clean shirt and slacks. My armor for the battle ahead. Then I picked up my phone. Greg had sent 12 messages overnight, each sounding more concerned than the last. Dad, please answer. I'm really worried. Should I come check on you? I crafted my response with surgical precision. Sorry, son. Car broke down seriously. Had to leave it at the shop. Rescheduled dinner. 3 dots appeared instantly. He had been waiting, glued to his phone. Of course, Dad. Main thing is you're okay. I read it twice, hearing the phoniness like a wrong musical note. Main thing is you're okay. No, Greg. The main thing was supposed to be that I was dead on the freeway with failed brakes. But I was still breathing, and now he was scrambling. At 9 o'clock, I was sitting in attorney Mark Davidson's office downtown. He was 44, sharp-eyed, with framed law degrees covering one wall. His reputation for handling complex estate cases was exactly why I had chosen him. I didn't mention attempted murder yet. I just asked about changing a will. Pennsylvania inheritance law, disinheriting beneficiaries. Davidson explained the process, made notes, then looked up. It's pretty straightforward, Mr. Stone. You can disinherit anyone if you make your intentions absolutely clear in the document, but families can challenge it. What if the person I'm disinheriting tried to hurt me? I interrupted quietly. To gain the inheritance faster. His pen stopped moving instantly. That's a different conversation, Mr. Stone. A very different conversation. He continued, Pennsylvania law is clear on this. If someone attempts to harm you for financial gain, they are automatically disqualified from inheritance. He paused. And we're talking serious felony charges. 10 to 20 years. I need options, I said. Legal options before I make formal accusations. He studied my face. How certain are you? Gathering evidence now. The police station came next. Detective Ramirez was in his mid-40s, with tired eyes and coffee stains on his tie. I presented Ken's photographs, his written statement, and my timeline documentation. Ramirez listened intently, taking notes, but his expression remained cautious. Mr. Stone, I understand this is terrifying, he said, but without proof of who accessed your garage, who actually did the cutting. Do you have security cameras? Witnesses? No, I admitted. He sighed. Well, we'll open a report. Send an officer to document the vehicle. But I'm being honest. Without more concrete evidence, this is property damage. Maybe attempted vehicular manslaughter if we can connect someone to the crime. Do you have suspicions? He asked. I met his gaze steadily. I need to be certain before I accuse anyone. But I'm working on that. Evening found me sitting on my back porch, completely exhausted but too wired to rest. Movement caught my eye. My neighbor, Betty Clark, was approaching through the dusk, holding 2 steaming mugs in her hands. She was 61, silver-haired, with kind features but intelligent eyes that I realized I had never truly noticed before. I saw your lights on all night, she said, cutting straight to the point. And you've been gone all day. George, what is wrong? Something about her directness managed to break through my carefully constructed defenses. I told her the whole story, carefully, watching her face for any sign of judgment. She set down her tea immediately. For years ago, Betty began quietly, my own daughter tried to have me declared legally incompetent. She wanted my house, my savings, said I was senile, dangerous to myself. She had doctors lined up, all the paperwork ready. Her eyes met mine. I understand exactly what you're feeling. The betrayal. The disbelief that your own child could. She didn't need to finish the thought. When my daughter did what she did, Betty continued, I wanted to pretend it wasn't really happening. I wanted to believe she was just misguided, not truly malicious. She leaned forward slightly. But George, when someone shows you who they are, you must believe them, especially family. They know exactly what they're doing. He's my only child, I said, my voice cracking for the first time. How do I? You protect yourself, Betty finished firmly, and you make absolutely sure he faces the consequences, or he will try again. Her words hung between us in the cool air. I spent 40 years exposing fraud, I said finally, following money trails, finding the truth in numbers. But I never, ever thought, he's my son. I changed his diapers, taught him to ride a bike, and now I'm building a criminal case against him like he's just another file number. Betty took my hand. He stopped being just your son when he cut those brake lines. You are not betraying him. He betrayed you. Remember that. Midnight approached. Betty stood up to leave, pausing at the porch steps. I know what the next few days will feel like, she said. The doubt, the second-guessing, wondering if you're overreacting. She turned back to face me. You're not. Trust your instincts. Trust the evidence. And if you need anything, someone to talk to, someone to remind you why you're doing this, I'm 3 houses down. Anytime. I watched her disappear into the darkness. A small figure carrying more strength than I would have imagined. My phone buzzed. Greg, Dad, when should we reschedule? Really want to see you. I typed, I'll let you know. I have some things to take care of first. His response was immediate. Like what? Like protecting myself from you? Like changing my will? Like making sure you never get a penny of what you tried to kill me for? But I wrote, just personal business. Talk soon. I then turned off the phone completely. Inside, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom for the first time in 36 hours. The notebook lay on my nightstand, open to tomorrow's page. 3 items were printed in careful block letters. 1. Change locks. 2. Security cameras. 3. New will disinherit Greg. Reason stated clearly. I closed my eyes. Sleep finally came. Dreamless and dark. Wednesday morning arrived with an unexpected sense of clarity. Sunlight streamed through my window. The notebook was still on the nightstand, the action items staring back at me like a mission briefing. I showered, dressed, and made coffee. My phone sat on the counter, powered off. When I turned it on, 3 messages appeared. Greg had sent one an hour ago. Dad, you there? I took a sip of coffee, deliberately making him wait. Power comes from patience. The phone rang mid-morning. Greg's voice came through, warm, concerned, so perfectly performed I almost had to admire it. Dad, how about we have that dinner tomorrow? Thursday. Mom and I really want to see you. I kept my tone light. Tomorrow's a little tough, son. How about Friday? That gives me time to sort out this car situation. I heard something in his voice then, an eagerness edged with desperation. Friday works. Friday's perfect. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. Playing the role of the oblivious, trusting father was harder than I had expected, but it was absolutely necessary. Betty arrived late morning, and we drove together to Mark Davidson's office. This time, the conversation was completely different. Davidson spread papers across his large mahogany desk. Will templates, inheritance law summaries, criminal statutes. If we're doing this, he said, looking between us, we need to be thorough. Changing the will protects your assets. But if Greg tries again, we need solid evidence for criminal charges. Betty leaned forward. I used to work with private investigators when I practiced family law, she explained. We could install hidden security cameras in George's garage. If Greg tries to access it again, Davidson nodded slowly. That would give us attempted burglary at minimum. Conspiracy to commit murder if we can prove intent. I signed the new will paperwork with firm strokes. Everything was left to the Montgomery County Children's Hospital Foundation. Greg would receive $1. The reason was stated simply, for causes known to my son. The afternoon brought Carlos Mendoza, a private investigator Betty knew. He was 48, quiet, and carried a black equipment bag. In my garage, he installed 2 high-definition cameras. One above the main door, and one covering the workbench where my Hyundai now sat, back from Ken's shop. Motion activated, Mendoza explained. Infrared for night vision. Cloud storage so the footage can't be destroyed. If someone comes in here, we'll have video, timestamps, everything. 3 hours of work cost $1,200. I wrote the check without hesitation. Cheaper than a funeral. A locksmith arrived next. He changed all my locks, front, back, garage side entrance, new keys, new deadbolts. $380. The physical security mattered, but the message I sent next carried real weight. I texted Greg, "Son, I found that spare key you left here years ago. Want me to return it?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, and appeared again. Greg was clearly struggling with his response. Finally, "No, Dad, you keep it." I smiled grimly. He knew the spare key was how he'd gained entry on Sunday night. He knew I had just told him I'd discovered his access point. Now he knew I was paying attention, even if he didn't realize exactly how much. Evening settled soft and warm. Betty invited me to her porch. We sat in wooden chairs that creaked comfortably, watching the first stars emerge in the darkening sky. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Betty reached over and took my hand. Her palm was warm, slightly rough from gardening. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly. I looked at our joined hands. Mine weathered and spotted with age, hers smaller but equally marked by years. "I haven't felt this connected to another person in a long time," I admitted. "Since before my wife passed. I thought that part of life was over." Betty squeezed my hand gently. "Maybe it's just beginning again. In the worst circumstances, but beginning nonetheless." We sat like that as darkness completed its arrival. 2 people who had been betrayed by their children, finding unexpected comfort in each other. The stars multiplied overhead. Betty's porch light was off, giving us privacy. A dog barked once down the street, then quieted. I became acutely aware of the warmth of her hand, the subtle scent of lavender soap, the comfortable weight of her presence. "I should go," I said, not moving. "Let you get some rest." She turned to look at me, her face barely visible in the starlight. "Or you could stay a bit longer." "I'm not tired." Neither was I. Tired of fighting, maybe. Tired of being alone, certainly. But not sleepy. We remained seated as the night deepened. When I finally stood up to leave, Betty walked me to her front gate. "Friday," she said, reminding me of the dinner. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. "Dinner with Greg and Martha. I'll play the concerned, slightly confused elderly father. They'll try to assess whether I'm really going to sell the house." Betty touched my chest lightly over my heart. "And you'll be gathering evidence, watching their reactions, building your case." I covered her hand with mine. "This is who I am," I said. "The investigator." "Maybe," she replied. "You just needed the right case, the important one." She rose on her toes and kissed me briefly. "Call me when you get home tomorrow night. Or come by, whatever you need." After she left, I stood in my doorway, watching her porch light come on 3 houses down. My phone buzzed. "Greg. Looking forward to tomorrow, Dad. We have a lot to discuss." I typed back, "Me too, son. Me too." I meant it very differently than he thought. He wanted to discuss money, manipulation, and control. I wanted to watch them squirm, to gather evidence, and to see exactly how far they would go. Tomorrow night would tell me everything I needed to know. I locked my door, new locks, new keys, and walked through my house, checking the security camera feed on my phone. The garage cameras showed the empty space, waiting. Everything was ready. The trap was set. Now I just had to walk into theirs without getting caught. Friday arrived with a sense of grim inevitability. I spent the day in careful preparation, not physical but mental. I reviewed my notes from the week. The cut break lines, Greg's panic texts, Martha's transparent phone call. By late afternoon, I was dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, the uniform of a trusting father. Betty appeared at my door just before I left. "Remember," she said, touching my arm, "you're gathering information, not confronting them. Not yet." I nodded, kissed her cheek. I'll call you after. The drive to Lansdale took 30 minutes. With each mile, I put on my mask. The slightly confused, slightly lonely elderly father who trusted his son. Greg opened the door before I could even knock. He had clearly been watching. Dad, great to see you. The hug he gave me was too tight, held too long. Over his shoulder, Martha stood in the hallway, her smile bright and cold as chrome. When I mentioned I was still driving the rental because my Hyundai needed something complicated with the engine and brakes, I caught it. The briefest exchange of glances between them. Recognition, tension, fear. We sat at the dining table. The same table that held estate documents earlier this week was now set with careful domesticity. Beef stew, roasted vegetables, red wine. Martha served the food with practiced efficiency. I remember you love beef stew, George. She hadn't called me by my first name in years. The performance was completely transparent once you knew what to look for. Greg played the role of the attentive son, refilling my water glass, asking about my week. The whole conversation was surreal. 3 people eating a meal, 2 plotting murder while pretending to be normal, 1 pretending not to know. I played my part perfectly, the rambling older man, grateful for family attention, a little lonely, a little naive. Midway through the main course, I deployed my weapon. You know, I've been thinking a lot about the house, I said. It's really too much for me now. I spoke with a real estate agent. They think I could get $480,000, maybe more. After taxes, about $455,000 clean. They froze. Martha's knuckles whitened around her fork. Greg's smile became visibly strained. I'm thinking of buying a small condo, maybe $200,000, and using the rest to travel. I continued, as if discussing the weather. Europe, Paris, Rome. Maybe Alaska, too. The atmosphere shifted instantly, like air pressure dropping before a storm. Martha recovered first. George, that's a big decision. You shouldn't rush into anything. Greg added, his voice tight. Dad, the house is your life, your memories. You shouldn't sell. I continued as if oblivious. Oh, and I was at my lawyer's office this week, too. Just updating some documents. You know, at my age, you have to think about these things. I said it casually between bites. The reaction was immediate. Another desperate, silent look passed between them. What kind of documents? Martha asked, trying to sound merely curious. I waved a hand vaguely. Estate planning things. Boring legal stuff. My lawyer said it's important to keep everything current. I didn't elaborate. I simply let them imagine, wonder, and panic. The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate. Dessert was rushed. Coffee was declined. Greg and Martha were barely maintaining their facades now. When I stood to leave, claiming early fatigue, the relief in their faces was palpable. Drive safe, Dad, Greg said. We'll talk soon about the house before you do anything. In the rental car, I watched them in my rearview mirror. The moment my car turned the corner, they rushed back inside. I could imagine the conversation. Panicked, angry, desperate. I drove 3 blocks, pulled over and called Betty. It's done, I said. They're terrified. Her voice came through warm and worried. Are you okay? I considered. I'm not sure, but I'm in control. That's what matters. She was quiet for a moment. Be careful. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. I knew she was right. I was counting on it. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and replayed conversations. Greg's too tight hug, Martha's forced warmth. The way they both tensed when I mentioned the lawyer. When I pulled into my driveway, my phone showed 2 missed calls from Greg. No voicemail, just silence and need. I didn't call back. Instead, I walked through my house. New locks securing every entrance. Security cameras recording every angle of my garage. The screens on my phone showed empty frames. My Hyundai sitting untouched, bait waiting. I texted Betty, home safe. They're scrambling. I could see it in their eyes. Her response was immediate. Coming over. By the time she arrived 10 minutes later, I was sitting at my kitchen table with the lights off, staring at nothing. She didn't turn on the lights, just sat beside me in the darkness, and took my hand. "Tell me," she said quietly, and I did. Not the strategic details, but the human cost. I looked at my son tonight and saw a stranger. Worse than a stranger, an enemy. My voice cracked slightly. When did I lose him, Betty? When did he stop being my child and become this? She squeezed my hand. You didn't lose him. He chose a path. That's not on you. We sat in the darkness. Two people who had survived betrayal by their children, holding each other's pain. Outside, night settled deep. Somewhere, Greg and Martha were plotting their next move. And I, despite the ache in my chest, was ready. Saturday unfolded with careful normality. I woke up next to Betty. She had stayed the night, both of us needing the comfort of not being alone. We shared coffee in the morning sunlight and talked about unimportant things, letting the ordinary routine provide temporary shelter from the storm that was still building around us. By early afternoon, Betty returned to her house. I decided I needed to make a grocery run, milk, bread, the weekly basics that continue regardless of family betrayals and murder plots. The store was crowded with weekend shoppers. I moved through the aisles on autopilot, my mind elsewhere, constantly replaying the dinner conversation from Friday night. When I turned onto my street with the grocery bags sitting in the passenger seat, I saw him immediately. Greg's car was parked in my driveway. He was standing at my front door, shifting his weight, checking his phone, radiating nervous energy. When I pulled in, his head snapped up. "Dad, we need to talk." It was a demand, not a greeting. I took my time gathering the grocery bags, using the moments to prepare myself. My heart rate elevated, but my hands remained steady. "Of course, son. Come inside." I unlocked the door. New locks, new keys that Greg didn't have, and we entered the house. The house felt different with him in it now, contaminated by his presence. I set the groceries on the kitchen counter. I didn't offer him coffee or a seat. I just waited. Greg paced the living room, unable to stand still. "Dad, I've been thinking about what you said about selling the house." I remained neutral. "Yes." His voice rose. "This house, it's not just yours. It's family. It should stay in the family. Mom lived here. I grew up here. You can't just sell it to strangers." I felt the calculated manipulation, the transparent appeal to sentiment. "It's my house, Greg. I can do what I want with it." His control began slipping fast. "But what about me? What about your family? Don't I matter?" The entitlement in his voice was raw and undisguised now. "Of course you matter," I said. "But I don't understand why you're so concerned about what I do with my own property." Greg stopped pacing, faced me directly, his face flushed, jaw clenched. "Because it should be mine. I'm your son. I have a right to it." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. I went very still. A right to property I own? To money I earned? Greg realized he'd said too much but couldn't seem to stop now. "I'm drowning in debt, Dad. $75,000. Martha and we need." He caught himself, tried desperately to recover. "We just think you should keep the house. For the family. For the memories." But then, fatally, he added, "If everything had just gone according to plan." He stopped. His face went pale. The words trailed into silence. My voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "If what had gone according to plan, Greg?" The question sat between us like a live grenade. Greg backed toward the front door. "Nothing. I just meant." I stepped forward. "You meant if I'd driven my car last Monday? If the brakes had failed on the highway? If I died in the accident you arranged?" His face drained of all color. You're not." He couldn't form coherent words. "Get out," I said, my voice like ice. Greg fumbled for the doorknob, wrenched the door open, and escaped into the afternoon sunlight. His car peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing. I stood in my doorway, watching until the car disappeared, then closed and locked the door. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone. I called Detective Ramirez. "He admitted it," I said, my voice slightly unsteady. Not directly, but enough. If everything had gone according to plan. He was talking about my death. Ramirez's voice was sharp, immediately alert. Did you record it? I closed my eyes. No. I wasn't expecting him to show up. Ramirez sighed heavily. It's something, Mr. Stone, but it's not enough for an arrest. We need more. After hanging up, I called Betty. She arrived within minutes, finding me sitting on my couch, trembling. Not from fear, but from the emotional earthquake of hearing my own son essentially confirm he tried to commit murder. Betty pulled me into her arms. You're doing the right thing, she murmured. He made his choice, not you. We sat like that for a long time, me finally allowing the tears I'd held back all week. Betty held me through it, saying nothing, just being present. Evening settled over the house. Betty had made tea. Neither of us really drinks tea, but it was a comfort ritual. We sat close on the couch, her arm around my shoulders, my head leaning against hers. What happens now? She asked. My voice was rough from crying. We wait. Ramirez has his verbal slip on record, but it's not enough for an arrest. We need more. Betty shifted to look at me. The camera's in the garage. If Greg tries again, I finished for her. We'll have him on video, and this time, I'll make sure it's enough to put him away. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. We both looked at it. Greg's name on the screen. I picked it up, read the message aloud. Dad, I'm sorry about today. I'm just worried about you. Care about you. Betty made a sound of disgust. I stared at the words. He actually thought I still believed him after what he'd said. After what he'd done. I typed a response with deliberate slowness. We'll talk later. I need time to think. I sent it, then set the phone down. You're not going to confront him? Betty asked. Not yet, I said. Not until I have everything I need. He's gonna try again. I know it. And when he does, I'll be ready. Outside, darkness was complete. The security cameras in my garage recorded empty space. Waiting. The trap was set. The bait was placed. Now came the hardest part. Patience. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive quiet. I woke up early. The house silent except for the refrigerator's hum and distant bird song. Betty had stayed over. We'd fallen into an unspoken pattern where neither of us wanted to be alone overnight. She was making coffee when my phone rang. Detective Ramirez's name appeared on the screen. My stomach tightened instantly. Mr. Stone. His voice came through, sharp with controlled excitement. The cameras caught something. You need to come down to the station. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. When? Last night. Early this morning. Technically, around 3:20 a.m. Betty reached across the table and took my free hand. I squeezed back. I'm on my way. In Detective Ramirez's office, Betty and I watched the security footage on a monitor. The timestamp read 3:20 a.m. The garage camera showed darkness. Then motion-activated recording began. The side door opened. The lock was visibly damaged, indicating forced entry. A figure entered, immediately recognizable. Greg. He was dressed in dark clothes and carrying a small toolbox. He approached my Hyundai, set down his tools, and opened the driver's side door. His hand reached toward the steering column, then froze. Greg's head turned slowly, scanning the entire garage. He couldn't see the hidden cameras, but something had definitely alerted him. Instinct, paranoia, maybe the subtle hum of the electronic equipment. He stood perfectly still for nearly a minute, then abruptly closed the car door, grabbed his tools, and quickly exited. He never actually touched the brake system, but the intent was crystal clear. Ramirez stopped the playback. We have braking and entering. We have him inside your garage with tools approaching your vehicle, the same vehicle that was previously sabotaged. Combined with the mechanic's documentation of the original line cutting. His verbal admission yesterday about if everything had gone according to plan, and the clear financial motive. He looked at me directly. Mr. Stone, this is enough for an arrest warrant. Attempted murder, breaking and entering, possibly conspiracy if we can tie his wife to it. But I need to ask you directly. Are you prepared to press charges against your son? Once we do this, there is absolutely no turning back. I sat in silence, staring at the frozen image on the screen. Greg's face was caught in the harsh infrared light, his expression tense and guilty. Betty's hand was warm and steady in mine. I thought about Greg as a little child, learning to ride his bike, graduating from high school, getting married. Then I thought about the cut-break lines, about sitting at dinner Friday, pretending not to know my son wanted me dead, about the $75,000 in debt that somehow became more important than a father's life. Yes, I said finally, my voice steady. I'm ready to press charges. Ramirez nodded, picked up his phone. I'll get the warrant. Early that afternoon, Ramirez called. We picked him up at his workplace. He's in custody. I was back home, Betty beside me on the couch. I expected to feel satisfaction, vindication, something strong. Instead, there was just hollowness. What happens now? I asked. Arraignment Monday, Ramirez explained. Given the severity, attempted murder of a family member, bail will be set high, if it's granted at all. His lawyer will probably push for a plea deal. After hanging up, I sat motionless. Betty asked if I was okay. I didn't know how to answer. The phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Martha's voice exploded through the speaker. You had him arrested. Your own son. What kind of father are you? Her voice was shrill, borderline hysterical. Years of careful manipulation were stripped away, leaving only raw fury. He tried to kill me, Martha, I stated. Twice. It's on video. She didn't address this. You're destroying his life. Our life. Over what? Money? Because he asked for help. My voice dropped to ice. He cut my brake lines. He broke into my garage with tools to do it again. The police have the evidence. You want advice? Get a good lawyer for yourself, too, if you were involved. I ended the call and blocked both their numbers. Betty watched me, saying nothing. We moved to the back porch, sitting in the late afternoon light. She took my hand. I finally exhaled properly for the first time in a week. The sun set in shades of orange and pink, unseasonably warm for early March. We sat without speaking, watching the light fade from the sky. My phone lay on the small table between our chairs, silent now. That chapter was forcibly closed. Betty softly broke the silence. Tomorrow you'll have to testify at the arraignment. Are you ready? I considered. I don't know if anyone's ever ready to testify against their own child, but I'll do it. I'll tell the truth. She nodded, not pushing. Somewhere in the city, Greg sat in a holding cell, beginning to understand consequences. Somewhere else, Martha was probably calling lawyers, calculating her exit strategy, planning how to distance herself from her imprisoned husband. But here on this porch, I felt something I hadn't felt since Monday evening when my car wouldn't start. Peace. Not happiness, the wound was too fresh for that. But peace. The knowledge that I was safe, that justice was moving forward, that I didn't have to look over my shoulder anymore. Betty stood, offering her hand. Come inside. I'll make dinner. Something simple. I took her hand, let her pull me to my feet. Through the window I could see my kitchen. Warm light, familiar space, now shared with someone who understands betrayal and survived it. Someone who was teaching me that survival wasn't just about safety, but about choosing to live fully after nearly losing everything. We walked inside together, leaving the darkening evening behind, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The week following Greg's arrest passed in a blur of legal proceedings. Monday's arraignment. Greg entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Bail was denied due to the severity of the charge and flight risk. His court-appointed attorney immediately began negotiating. You have permission to continue. Here is Part 7. Balance Scale, Part 7. The plea agreement. By Wednesday, a plea deal was formally offered. I met with the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who laid out the options clearly. First-degree attempted murder carries a penalty of 20 years, she explained. But proving premeditation to a jury is often uncertain, even with the evidence you have. Your son's defense attorney is pushing hard for a deal. They propose assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm, plus breaking and entering. That would result in 6 years total, and he would be eligible for parole in 4 years with good behavior. She watched my face intently. It's your call, Mr. Stone. We can absolutely take it to trial if you want. I thought about the prospect of months of testimony, reliving everything publicly, having my son's lawyer tear apart my story and my grief. I thought about Betty, and about the strong need to simply move forward with my life. Take the deal, I said. 6 years is enough. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, and fluorescently lit. I sat in the gallery, Betty beside me, her hand resting warmly in mine. The prosecutor presented the plea agreement. Greg stood before the judge, his shoulders slumped, diminished in his orange uniform. The judge addressed him. Mr. Gray, do you understand that you are pleading guilty to assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm and breaking and entering? Greg's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. And you understand the sentence is 6 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 4 years? Yes. The judge signed the paperwork. So ordered. That was it. 2 minutes to conclude a relationship that had spanned 35 years. Before the bailiffs led Greg out, he turned. His eyes finally found mine in the gallery. For a long moment, father and son stared at each other across the courtroom's divide. I saw no anger in Greg's face, no defiance, just emptiness. And maybe, underneath that emptiness, something that might have been belated understanding. Greg's mouth moved. The words were quiet enough that only those nearby heard them. I'm sorry. I nodded once. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation. Just an acknowledgement that the words were spoken. Then Greg was led away through the side door, and he was gone. Outside the courtroom, the prosecutor pulled me aside. We couldn't build a case against the wife, Martha. No evidence that she directly participated in the physical crime. She continued, she's already filed for divorce, is already moving to another state. She's essentially abandoning him. I wasn't surprised. Martha was always about money, about advancement. A husband in prison served neither purpose. Will she try to contact me? I asked. The prosecutor shook her head. The restraining order is still in effect. She knows to stay away. One more loose end tied off. One more threat neutralized. 1 month later, in April, the park by the lake was warm with spring sunshine. Betty and I walked the path around the water, our fingers intertwined. She had moved in permanently. Her house had sold. Her belongings were now merged with mine. The combined household felt right, natural, like we had been doing this for years instead of just weeks. We were planning a summer wedding. Nothing elaborate, just close friends and Betty's sister. The ceremony would be in her friend's garden, intimate and genuine. I had changed my will a 3rd time. Half of my estate would go to the Montgomery County Children's Hospital Foundation, and the other half to Betty. The house that Greg wanted so desperately now belonged to a man who had learned to share it, to fill it with laughter and music and life, instead of lonely silence. Back home that evening, I found an envelope in the mailbox. It had a prison postmark. Greg's handwriting. I stared at it for a long moment, then carried it inside. Betty saw it but asked no questions. At the kitchen table, I held the unopened letter. He wrote me. Betty sat down her tea. Do you want to read it? I turned the envelope in my hands. Not now. Maybe someday. But not today. I opened a kitchen drawer, placed the letter inside, and closed it. Today is for living. For us. For the future. Betty smiled, taking my hand across the table. Then let's go for that walk we planned. The evening's beautiful. We left the house hand in hand. 2 people in our 60s who had survived our children's worst betrayals and found an unexpected second chance at love and trust. The letter sat in the drawer, waiting for a day that may or may not come. But today, life called louder than the past. The park path wound through newly budding trees, the lake reflecting the sunset colors like melted copper. Other couples walked past, some young, some old, all absorbed in their own worlds. Betty and I moved at an easy pace, no rush, nowhere to be except here. Do you think about him? Betty asked after a comfortable silence. I consider it sometimes, I replied. Mostly, I wonder when it changed. When he stopped being my son and became someone who could do that. I squeezed her hand. But thinking about it doesn't change anything. He made his choices. Now he lives with them. Betty nodded. And you? What are you living with? I stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The setting sun lit her silver hair, her face open and kind. I'm living with you, with the possibility of happiness I thought I'd lost forever. With the understanding that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the person who stands beside you when everything falls apart. She rose on her toes and kissed me gently. Good answer. We continued our walk, circling back toward home as twilight deepened. In the kitchen drawer, Greg's letter sat unopened, its words frozen in time, waiting for a moment that may never arrive. But out here in the living world, I walked hand in hand with Betty Clark, two people who had earned their second chance through survival and courage, and the willingness to trust again. The house ahead showed lights in the windows. Our home now, filled with shared meals and conversation, and the quiet comfort of companionship. Justice had been served. Safety had been secured. And most importantly, improbably, life had become worth living again. Not despite the betrayal, but because I chose to survive it, to fight back with truth and law rather than bitterness, and to accept love when it appeared in the aftermath. The evening air carried the scent of spring flowers. Somewhere a bird called its final notes before nightfall. And I, George Stone, 63 years old, retired auditor, and survivor of my son's murder attempt, walked toward home with the woman I loved, Betty Clark, ready for whatever tomorrow brings. The peaceful routine with Betty became my new normal, replacing the isolation and paranoia that had defined the previous months. The house felt alive again. We spent the next few weeks painting the dining room a warm, welcoming cream color, finally erasing the harsh memory of Greg's angry outburst and Martha's cold stare. Betty had a way of bringing simple domesticity back into focus. She loved gardening, and soon the front yard, which I had neglected since Karen passed away, was filled with the promise of spring bulbs and blossoming bushes. We made small decisions together, the kind of mundane choices that build a shared life. We chose a new, softer mattress for the master bedroom and replaced the old, creaking porch chairs with comfortable wicker ones. Every choice we made was a quiet repudiation of the dark plot that had nearly consumed me. This wasn't just fixing a house. It was reclaiming a home. Mark Davidson, my lawyer, finalized the remaining legal steps. He confirmed that Martha's divorce from Greg was complete and that she had indeed moved far away. The restraining order ensured she posed no further threat, either legally or physically. My financial affairs were perfectly in order. The new will was registered, secure, and clearly articulated my intentions. The $600,000 estate would be split evenly between Betty and the Children's Hospital Foundation. Greg's inheritance was permanently a single dollar. The peace in my life allowed me to focus on Betty. She was more than an ally in a legal battle. She was a partner. Our relationship had blossomed from a shared understanding of profound betrayal into a deep, tender connection. We were two people who, in our 60s, had found a second chance at love and trust, born from the ruins of our own family lives. We began the preparations for our wedding. It would be held in June, in the intimate garden of her friend. I realized that the life Greg and Martha had tried to steal, the one focused on accumulating wealth for an undeserving heir, was nothing compared to the richness of the life I was building now. I was no longer waiting to die. I was planning to live. One sunny afternoon, I walked into the garage. The car lift and the tools were still there, but my Hyundai had been repaired and sold. In its place, I parked a new, bright red pickup truck. Something frivolous, impractical, and completely unlike the kind of car a retired auditor should drive. It was a symbol of my new freedom. The security cameras were still installed, but now they were just a reminder of a closed case, not an active threat. I was beginning to understand that the greatest triumph over Greg wasn't the prison sentence or the disinheritance. It was my ability to let go of the bitterness and choose happiness. It was the quiet, confident way I could now walk through my house and know that I was finally safe and profoundly loved. The letter from Greg still sat in the kitchen drawer. It was a tangible link to the past, a final piece of evidence I hadn't yet processed. Betty knew it was there, but she respected my need to deal with it on my own time. One evening after dinner, I took it out. The paper was slightly creased. I turned the envelope over in my hands. Betty was reading on the couch, the lamp casting a warm glow on her silver hair. "I keep thinking about what he wrote," I said, not looking at her. "I'm sorry. Was it real, or was it just part of the calculation? Trying to look good for the judge, or maybe hoping for a future visit?" Betty put her book down. "It doesn't matter, George. Even if it was real, his sorrow doesn't fix the break lines or rewind the clock. You have to decide if reading that letter serves your future, or keeps you chained to his past." I looked at the familiar, tight handwriting of my son. The son who learned to ride his bike in the street outside, who I'd helped through college, and who later tried to ensure I died in a fiery crash. I stood up and walked the few steps to the living room fireplace. I didn't open the letter. I simply held it over the ceramic mantelpiece. I didn't want the raw words of a desperate man to burn in my heart. I wanted the clean, simple end of an auditor's file. I placed the letter back in the drawer. "Not today," I said, repeating the words I'd used a month ago. "And maybe never." Betty smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Good. Let's go for a walk." We left the house, hand in hand, the twilight deepening over the neighborhood. The evening air carried the scent of spring flowers. I realized that the closure I needed wasn't in Greg's words, but in my own choices. Choosing safety, choosing love, choosing life. The life I had now was earned through courage, and it was lived with gratitude. Thank you for watching. Life had been quiet, too quiet, for the last few months. I'd been sitting in my living room for almost an hour, watching the sun set outside the window and listening to the low, steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was a cold Monday evening in early March when the phone finally rang, right around 7:15. 3 months. That's how much time had passed since my son, Greg, had stormed out of the house. It was the night his fist had slammed down on the kitchen table hard enough to shake the salt shaker, and the night my wife, Martha, gave me this look, a cold, distant stare, as I watched them leave, like I was something disgusting she'd scraped off her shoe. When the screen lit up with his name, Greg, my heart started thumping hard against my ribs, like a trapped bird trying to escape. But he wasn't calling to argue this time. His voice came through warm, gentle, even a little apologetic, softer than I'd heard it in years. "Dad, Mom and I have been talking," he said. "We miss you. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? She's making her famous beef stew. You know, your favorite. The one with those tiny little carrots you like." I should have been immediately suspicious. Anyone in their right mind would have been, given how things had ended. But I wasn't thinking clearly in that moment. I was just a 63-year-old man named George, completely exhausted by the endless silence in this large house. I was tired of eating lonely frozen meals at a dining table that was meant for 4, back when my late wife, Karen, was still alive. Back when Greg was just a young boy who looked at me like I knew everything, like I was a person worthy of respect. "I would absolutely love that, son," I replied, probably sounding far too eager and fast. "What time should I be there?" 7:30 sharp, he said. "Don't be late. Everything will be ready and waiting for you." After we hung up, I sat there, holding the phone, feeling a huge wave of relief wash over me. My chest felt lighter than it had in months. But then the memory of our last fight came back, sharp and painful. Greg's face, red with anger, the veins standing out in his neck, spit flying as he yelled at me. $35,000? That's nothing to you. You're sitting on all your retirement savings and the house and everything else, and I'm your own son. His voice had been rough and desperate, edged with something dark and ugly. "I'm drowning here, and you're hoarding your money like some selfish old miser." I had kept my cool. For decades of working as an internal auditor, examining government budgets, taught me how to keep a poker face when someone was trying to lie to me, steal, or cover up their crimes. "Greg, I can't just hand over that kind of cash for something you won't even clearly explain, I told him gently. You called it an investment opportunity, but you refused to tell me what it is. If you need real help, let's sit down with actual financial statements and real plans. His rebuttal had chilled me to the bone. I'm your son. That money is going to be mine someday anyway. Why can't you just help me now when I really need it? It wasn't the anger that got to me, but the sheer sense of entitlement. The assumption that my life, my savings, everything I had worked for, was just an inheritance he was impatient to collect. He'd stormed out, his shoulder hitting the doorframe so hard it left a visible mark that I still hadn't fixed. Martha had just stood there, her face unreadable but clearly not sympathetic. She didn't say a single word, just gave me that flat look and followed him out to their car.